And thanks everybody for having me. I want to talk about using ChatGPT with Python with a library, particularly with a library called LangChain. I know you had a ChatGPT talk last time, and I was able to watch part of that. It felt like that was more about using ChatGPT. So today I want to talk more about programming it and the way you interact with it. Oh, and let me say, I'm not really sure of people's experience levels or what they've done before, whatever. So if I'm going too fast or whatever, please just let me know and either tell Michael or go ahead and interrupt and let me know and ask your questions. So there are three big ways to interact with ChatGPT. I think probably most people have worked with the web interface now. There's also something called the playground, which is a lot like the web interface, but it has a couple more knobs you can tweak, and you can a couple more models you can try to use and everything. And then there's the API. The API is a regular REST API, and you can access it with any language you want. You can use Python. They also have an SDK specifically for Python, and we'll talk about this other library that builds on top of all that called LangChain. First about me, I'm a data science and machine learning consultant in Asheville, North Carolina now. I just moved here from Portland, Oregon. I've been working with AI and ML for many, many years. Got my master's in computer science and studying AI. And I worked on a PhD for a while, but ended up leaving because it was kind of AI winter back then, and there weren't any jobs anyway. So I kind of just went back into this industry. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I think LinkedIn's probably the easiest way, or on Twitter and through my website. Like I said, here, let me move this out of the way a little bit so I can see the whole screen. Like I said, the most common way to interact with ChatGPT is through the web interface, where you type in your comment or your question and ask it to do things, and it'll type things back. And if you try to use that for very much, you end up cutting and pasting prompts and editing prompts and changing things around. And we've all seen that. So we know that it's powerful, but it's got a couple challenges. One is that it has incomplete knowledge. It was trained up to, I think, September 2021. So it doesn't have a knowledge about any recent events. The big one that, the big elephant in the room is that it was trained or rewarded to chat, to give you reasonable like human sounding responses, not necessarily be factual. So it has a tendency to maybe hallucinate or make things up. But that's because that wasn't the point. The point was to get it to kind of chat and sound natural. And also, it's not the strongest with its math or logic. So if you try to ask it, it's really easy to confuse it, to ask it logic questions or math questions or whatever. Some of the APIs and things we see today will try to address all of these issues and to varying degrees of success. And of course, OpenAI is working on making their system more knowledgeable and trying to address all these issues themselves. So that was the web interface. The playground is in the development section of the website. Here you can change, you have more models you can experiment with. You can set the mode, you can set the temperature. The temperature is a weird term, but it's I think it comes from physics or like simulated annealing, that the more energy, the higher the temperature there is in the system, the more variability it's going to be. And then as the system cools, it'll become more and more structured, and until it's kind of a solid form. Think of steam turning into water and water turning into ice. As the temperature lowers, you get, well, as the temperature rises, you get more and more creativity from the answers. You get more randomness, I guess. And there's some other settings you can set, like if there are, we all know, well, we know that ChatGPT, or the LLM, the underlying LLM, is really a super powerful autocomplete. But if you go to autocomplete, sounds like I like to, there could be a lot of things you could say: eat, play, sleep, whatever. All those are pretty good. You can set things like how often it picks the very best one, the very best answer, or at least the most common answer, how often it picks from the top 10, how often it does a bunch of different things. So you get a little bit more control in the kinds of answers you get. Then there's also the API. It's documented at platform.openapi.com, and it's got a couple different endpoints that are interesting. One is text completion in chat, which is kind of what we've done, but we do it programmatically. It can do image generation, so you can prompt DALL-E to get data out. You can fine tune models. So if you have a model that you want, or if you have a use case where you have, the underlying LLM GPT, 3.4, 3.5 or 4 was trained on internet English, internet language, which has a particular style and cadence. It's a little bit more informal, I think. But if you happen to have like legal documents or medical documents that have a different kind of language, and you really feel like you wanted to go expend the energy, the effort, the money to retrain, to fine tune a model, you can fine tune a model on that language set for your use case. It's got an embedding endpoint, so you can get a vector that describes a chunk of text we'll talk a little more about that in a little bit. You can do speech to text, do the whisper, their whisper model. You can run like a podcast or a sales meeting or anything through Whisper and get text out. And they have a moderation API, which will tell you if they think that the text you're going to put in is problematic, which can be useful to not get in trouble with them, but it's not like particularly useful for, well, I don't know that how useful it is for regular work kind of things. All right. Again, let me know if any questions or anything like that. I went through a couple things. Okay, so the API is a straightforward REST API. If you've done any kind of API work before, it should be kind of familiar to you. You could use requests to do a GET to a particular endpoint. You just need to add 2 headers to your OpenAI organization and the authorization, a bearer header. So you get those from the page where you sign up, and you can look at your account and get that information. You just do the request and you get a JSON object back, and so you can print that out. This is the request to get models. I know this is a Python meetup, but I know that a lot of people like other interesting languages, more esoteric. So if there isn't an SDK for you, you can certainly do it with a REST language, with just a REST call. Particular things like Excel can do REST calls, so HTTP calls. So you could probably program a lot of things right into Excel or some other application like that, if you needed to, if you wanted to. There's a Python SDK though, so it's easier to use that, where you can just import the OpenAI library, set the organization and the API key, and then you can call a bunch of different functions on that, including a model list, which gives you a list of the models that are available. Questions or anything? No? All right. Let me go back to maybe why you would want to do this. Well, I came up with 3 kind of overlapping reasons or really big use cases for this. One is automating a workflow. If you find the web UI useful for something, sometimes you want to make slight tweaks to your prompt. And so you kind of can do that programmatically. The other is using updated and focused data. So as we mentioned, the data in ChatGPT, what its knowledge is a 1.5 years old now at this point. And they're probably not going to retrain them on a regular basis. So I wouldn't count on that stuff being updated because it's very expensive to retrain. But there are techniques to get it to use updated documents. Also focus data, you might want to say, limit it to only medical information or medical information in one field, or let's say opinion pieces by this one particular author or something, and say, just answer based on this information. So you can do that with data. And as Kenneth asked before, there are recent techniques using recent techniques that I'm going to call multi-step prompts, where the system can actually do multiple actions in a row to try to achieve a particular goal. LangChain does this. OpenAI has plugins, which is kind of a simple version of doing that. There's also something called Baby AGI and OpenAI. What is it? OpenAI? It'll come to me. That do this, do multiple step prompts.
Auto GPT.
Auto GPT, thank you. Geez, we can talk about that. I'd love to hear how people are using that, or if they've gotten much success with that. But we can talk about that later. All right, the first case, automating workflow. Let's say you are a real estate agent, or you have a use case where you like GPT and you just want to tweak a prompt. It's really just a templating language, much like you would use in a web app or something like that. You could say, write a description for a house. It's got this number of bedrooms, this number of bathrooms. It's got this kind of design to it, and these features and these benefits, and it'll write that description for you. And if you have 100 houses, it'll do it for 100 houses. If you have, whatever comes in, or if something comes in, you can do it right when it comes in. So it's pretty straightforward. And if you have something where you've got a multiple step that you're going to program explicitly, you can do it that way too. You can just first write the description, then write a letter to the neighbors, then write some other piece of information you need. So you can program all that with Python or with any language. We're talking about Python here, and hitting the API. And it's fairly straightforward. In this particular case, we're going to use a prompt that has, I think, 4 variables: the number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. And I'm going to say the prompts I have in here are just kind of examples. You can come up with much better prompts with some work, and the prompts will get better depending on exactly the more you know what you need to do. But the idea is that you create a prompt, and here I'm just using a simple F string, and that should fill in the variables, and so you can kind of imagine what that string is going to look like. Then I create I call OpenAI chat completion.create. I specify a model. You don't have to, but in this case, I really wanted to show that you could specify a model. And since this is a chat, what you pass in is an array of messages, and the only message in this array is from the user, which is me, and the content is that prompt that I have, that string that's up there. And I get back this completion object. Or I get back a result object. I call it completion. And I just have to look through that to get the particular content I want. In that case, it writes me a little quaint, charming craftsman-style home, boasts 3 bedrooms and bathrooms, blah, blah, blah. Which is a pretty good sales description. They're always cozy and charming and quaint. So I picked up on that language. But you can see how it would be easy to generate this or put it in a loop or do whatever you need to do that. I do want to point out that there are some errors with this response. The craftsman details such as the trim work, built-in shelving, and exposed wood beams. I never mentioned those things. So this house may not have built-in shelving. So you got to be careful about that. But you can be careful about that by adding those kinds of restrictions or that kind of information to the prompt and saying, don't add things that I didn't mention. These are the features it has, and so on. So you can build out a pretty complex or really long prompt to get a better and better response from the system. But the rest of it is pretty standard kind of boilerplate things that you would see. Of course, the neighborhood's always fantastic, and you're going to love it, and it will become a perfect home. So that's the prompt. So that's where we can play with prompt engineering. We use Python to create prompts for us kind of automatically. It's a string manipulation at that point. So that should be kind of straightforward. Some tips for creating the prompts, though, are that the more information you provide, the more direction you provide, you can even provide examples in the prompt, the better your response will be. And you can see how you can start programming a prompt with a bunch of different examples. If you have different kinds of queries that you want to run, and then you can run them automatically, or you can run them, in a program in an automated way. Some tips. It's kind of interesting. You can tell it to limit its response to the information in the prompt, so it doesn't make up stuff about built-in shelving that we don't have. You can ask it to critique and rewrite its response. So maybe the next step, prompt 2, it doesn't necessarily need to be the letter to the neighbors, but it'll say, okay, take that response you gave me, but improve it. And that actually works really well. It'll actually give you a much better one. And you can also specify what kind of tone, if you want it really salesy or only kind of salesy or not salesy at all or whatever, or you want it to be funny or something, you can make the prompts like that, and you can improve them as you go. And it's important to experiment with the different prompts, creating different prompts, and with different models. I showed it with GPT 3.5, which is a really nice model. It's not as good as GPT-4. So you can call GPT-4, but GPT-4 is expensive and a lot slower. So, or more expensive and a lot slower. So if you find that GPT 3.5 works well enough for you, you can just stick to that and save some time and save some money. But that's up to you to decide how you want to run your code. Any questions on this? Comments? No? Okay. Use case 2 is updated data. So over the weekend, Bed Bath & Beyond declared bankruptcy. But if you ask ChatGPT about it, it says, I can't provide any real-time information as my knowledge was updated in September 2021. Like I said, I don't know how often they're going to update these. I'm definitely not going to update them weekly or anything like that, or monthly, or probably not even yearly. They're very expensive to train. So we're not stuck with, but this is the model we have to work with for quite a while. But you can work around that by providing it news or information or documents that you want it to use when it's creating your answer. It's stuck. So I have a file called bbb.txt, which is just a news report of something that happened to BB, a report of Bed Bath & Beyond over the weekend. My question in this case is, has Bed Bath & Beyond filed for bankruptcy? Kind of a leading question, because of course I know they did, and of course I have the text here, but it's an example to show how you go about this. And then your prompt could be something like, given the following document, create an answer. If you don't know the answer, just say you don't know. Don't make up an answer. Only use the documents. Provide the sources. Or you can build up a prompt like that that really constrains how it answers, and hopefully it'll answer in a way that's appropriate to you. Then you fill in the question and the template and the text using the template matching, string templates, and same type of thing. Chat completion, create. Again, I'm using 3.5 Turbo. You could use GPT-4. And again, I only have a simple user prompt. I'm not going to talk about the system prompt because I don't know how much time I had. This topic is new and everything changes like all the time, and so I could talk about it for hours and hours. But I know this isn't like a 5-day course on it. The chat completion thing lets you have this system prompt, or system role, where you can add a message, and you might want to say something like, "You are a friendly news summarizer, you don't make things up, you whatever, as the system," and that kind of sets the context for how the system is going to answer you. And then you can add the messages that are for the user. That's your question, and you can add some other things like that. But this is just the simplest version. You just give it, the only message you give it is the user's question, which comes in that form of that long prompt. You run it. Or you make the call and you get the answer, and then the answer you get back is yes, Bed Bath & Beyond did file for bankruptcy protection. Company, this is all correct. Anticipates closing the stores by June 30th. So that is all correct, and that what information was in the bbb.txt file I gave you. Oh, I'm sorry, I gave it. Interestingly enough, you can ask other questions like, using that same prompt and that same code, I ask, how are Tesla sales this quarter? Because Tesla also reported last week. And the system in this case says, I'm sorry, the document does not contain the information. It doesn't go and try to make something up. So that's incredibly useful right there. Trying to use those kinds of prompts, and the idea of providing information in the prompt to get it to answer questions. I think that cuts down the hallucination and really gives you really useful answers. And then relatedly, you can ask it to summarize a bunch of text. So as news comes in, you could, let's say as news comes in, you can ask it to do something like provide a short summary of the following text at grade school level. Again, you can just template in whatever text you wanted. Now use the bbb.txt thing, and it gave me a summary of that news report. It's pretty similar. I mean, it talks about the bankruptcy because that's what the article was about, but it just simplifies it. It's a lot shorter than the original article. So you can get some data out of your database, out of your CRM, whatever, as your sales reports, whatever. You can also use Python to hit any API, get weather, stock prices, summarize anything you want like that. And I think that if we think about this, most of us at work, whatever, we have user comments, we have sales calls, we have trouble tickets, we have internal memos that we can question, that we can summarize, that we can deal with. That would be really useful in a system like this. Or that would be really useful to have a system like this to interrogate. Okay. So at this point, let me bring in LangChain. So what LangChain is a library that works on top of the OpenAI API and Python and requests and everything else to help you build prompts even faster and help you write code snippets, little applications faster. For example, we can create this, we can bring in OpenAI and have it, initialize it with a particular temperature. In this case, we have a pretty high temperature because we want it to be creative. Our prompt is, what's a good name for a company that makes, and then the product is just a template. And so we create this LangChain object called a prompt template. And then we use that prompt template in the OpenAI LLM to create the LLM chain. And then we run the LLM chain, passing it the variables that we want. In this case, there's only one variable, so we can pass in a single string. Otherwise, we could pass in a dictionary that says product is this, name of the company is that, price is that, or whatever, or number of bedrooms is this, and number of bathrooms is that, and so on. And then we would get an answer back right away. Not right away. We get an answer back, and the answer would be fleet full of fun. Feet full of fun. That's the answer if it did that. This isn't much easier than the OpenAI code that we just saw. It's very similar. It's slightly different, but there are some benefits to it. In particular, there's benefits to more complicated scenarios where we want to use a document and ask questions about the document. But it's really useful if the document itself is bigger than fits in the prompt. The language models have what they call a token limit, and tokens are kind of like words. They're actually parts of words. So it could have a 4,000 token limit, meaning you can only put in 4,000 tokens, which ends up being around 3,000 words. There's this tick token library that will count the tokens for you, so you can figure that out. But basically, it's like 3/4, a little bit more. Sorry, the number of words is like 75% the number of tokens, roughly. So if you wanted to summarize, or if you wanted to question a document that was really long, like a book or something, you would need to find ways to work with that, because you couldn't stick the whole book in the prompt, right? You can't say, what did Hamlet say in this passage, and put that all of Hamlet in there. So there are ways to work around that. And then LangChain gives you a chain to do that really quickly, really easily. So the State of the Union here, don't know which state of this is one of their examples. I don't remember what year, which State of the Union was. I don't think it's the most recent one, probably the one before that. We're going to load that up. We're going to stick that into a vector store database, which is an in-memory database. And then you write out the query, and then you index the query, and you get the answer. And you'll get an answer about this. And it'll tell you what the question was, what the answer was, and what the source was. So what this is hinting at is at the beginnings of you being able to load up multiple documents. So let's say you can load up all of the State of the Union addresses that have ever happened. And then you can say, hey, what did the president say about the Spanish War or whatever, and it'll find a section in that document collection that talks about the Spanish War, and then give you answers about that. Or you can say, like, summarize the president's comments about the Spanish War. And in this case, the president wouldn't be one person, it'd be like all of the presidents. So this is the beginning of LangChain giving you that ask my PDF, or ask my employee manual, or ask my whatever type approach in a really, really simple way. And I have an example that does this in a more manual way. If we really want to do a deep dive, and if there's time and interest and stuff, we can talk about that later. But LangChain gives you an easy way to create this kind of code that does this really quickly. Okay. So that was the response. So with LangChain, I mean, you can do the code, you can do all this with just straight Python. You can do it with the OpenAI API, or with LangChain has a lot of facilities built in to do document handling and extraction, because you might have just straight up text documents. You might have HTML documents that need to be processed. You might have PDF documents. You might have Word documents. You might have all kinds of different formats, and you want to always extract text out of them, because it's all text-based. This is a text-based system. It also integrates with other AI vendors. So I created the LLM using the OpenAI library, but there are other LLMs out there. There are other chat systems out there. So in particular, Anthropic and Cohere have one and have an API. So you could use those APIs instead if you want to do that. If you wanted to bring an LLM in-house and run it yourself, that's certainly possible. It's not like super easy. You need to have a beefy machine to run it, and you need to have an LLM that can actually perform well enough for your application and all that. You might want to retrain it and fine tune it and all that. That's certainly possible. So you could have LangChain just call your LLM instead. Vector DBs, we haven't talked about what they are. Actually, I think that's all. That's on the extra material. But it's so vectors. When you do embeddings, you take a piece of text and you come up with a series of numbers, a vector of numbers that really represent that text. And the idea is that pieces of text that are similar in meaning end up really close in that vector space. And so when you want to find out what the president said about the Spanish-American War, all the Spanish-American War comments are closely related in this space. Then you do a nearest neighbor search and you pick out, and that's how you can pick out all the Spanish-American War. Sorry, my dog is deciding to do something weird. You can pick out all the Spanish-American War documents, and then you can send those to the LLM and answer questions from that. And the example I showed before, it uses Chroma, and Chroma is a really nice vector database that runs locally. I think they're going to give you a web API too, but right now there's also Pinecone and Weaviate. I think I spelled that incorrectly. I think it's to be EAV. Do have an API now, so you don't have to run these vector databases locally if you don't want to, but you can run Chroma locally if you do want to. And then there are many different kinds of chains, including the Q&A chain that I just showed you, the summarization chains, there are agents, and there are a bunch of other changes in there. I think we have a question. So if an LLM was open source and they gave us the training data to train it, how would you go about doing that? That is a big question. There are tutorials out there on how to do that. I think if you wanted to use OpenAI specifically, they have an endpoint to do that. So you'd have to read the documentation about how to do that. And if you're trying to use one of the other open source LLMs, there are some concerns there because there are restrictions on the LLMs out there, on the models out there, and there are restrictions on the data. So if you're just experimenting, you could do whatever you'd like. But if you're going to do it for business, or if you want to do it in a legally correct way, you need to make sure that you find a model and the weights and the training data that is all completely open source and free for commercial use if you want to do that.
How do we do it the not so legal way? No, because there's some models out there that's, word on the street is that they're using GPT-4 to train it indirectly.
Right, and that was against OpenAI's terms of service.
Yeah.
So those models are the less legal ones. I mean, legal is kind of a strong word, but they're the ones you cannot use for commercial purposes. And those were the Llama model. Though that whole rigmarole started with the Llama models from Stanford, where Stanford basically had asked GPT for questions and answers, and then used those questions and answers to train its model. But that was against the terms of service. So those questions and answers, that data set, you really shouldn't use for anything commercial. The how to do that is possible. It's out there. So the OpenAI endpoint is not going to be useful there, but there are a lot of other documents out there that I can point you at. It's beyond this talk, so I'm not going to go into that any further, but that is definitely possible. Okay. I think you also said, and Face from Facebook. Yeah. Face is, I forgot what Face stands for. I always like the Annoy. Annoy was kind of the first one. So Annoy is another nearest neighbor, something like that. I don't remember Face. The fastest nearest neighbor search right now is called hierarchical small worlds models. So you'll see HSMW. And so the databases use that instead of Face or Annoy. But yeah, you could use any of those systems that do look, or you could do it yourself in NumPy. It's straightforward, just a matrix multiply, and it works out. And then you find the lowest values, and that works. That's easy. That's possible too. Okay. The last topic here, the last one of my benefits was multi-step prompts. What I call multi-step prompts. And the idea here is you provide tools for the LLM to reason about and to use. And you can use that to get information or for it to do things for you. OpenAI announced plugins. I think they're still in alpha. I don't think everybody has access to them, but that's like the first step. But LangChain has had agents for a while where it can, actually one in a minute, where you can do, it'll do multiple steps. It'll try to reason about what it needs to do next. And it'll try to reason about what's next. And then lately, the last week or two, AutoGPT and Baby AGI have come out, and they've gotten a lot of attention, a lot of press. I still have not gotten them to do anything super useful, but we'll talk about that in a minute. All right. Oh, here we go. The LangChain agent. It's not much harder. Sorry, my dog's in here with me. I thought he wanted to go out, but I think he's fine. You create an LLM. We use the OpenAI LLM, and then you create an array of different tools, and you need to look at the documentation to see what tools are available. The SERP API tool will search the search engines. I think it searches Google by default, but it can search Bing also, and whatever other search engines are out there, and give you responses. So if you wanted your agent, your chatbot, your prompt, to have the facility to search the internet for something, if it doesn't know what the answer is, you would give it the SERP API tool, and it could do that. The LLM math tool does the same thing, except it does math. I believe the math tool spins up a Python interpreter and will create, it'll create some Python for you to do whatever math you want it to do. Question is, which is better? You can never answer which is better in this world. You really need to try it out on your particular use case and see which one is better for you based on what kinds of questions you want to answer and what it is you're trying to do. Okay. Then you call this initialize agent, you give it the tools, you give it the LLM, you tell it the type of agent you want, and you kind of, there are a couple of like zero shot, multi-shot, and then React stands for something in particular. It's like reason and act. So it's going to reason, and then it's going to do an action. And then I told it verbose true so we can see what the steps are. And then this is the example from their code, which is a silly example, but it's what it is. It says, what was the high temperature in San Francisco yesterday in Fahrenheit? And what is that number raised to 0.23 power, right? So raised to that number. I don't know why you'd want to do this. I don't think you would, except to show that you need to answer this question in 2 steps, and you need information from yesterday. Which we know it's not trained on yesterday's temperature. We know it doesn't know that, and we know it's not really great at math. So this chain will test that. And what it'll do is it'll say, entering a new agent executive chain. It's thinking out loud so you can see what it's trying to do. It says, I need to find the temperature first, then use the calculator to raise it to the 0.023 power. Then it's going to action it's decided on is to do the search. It queries Google, I think, with high temperature and that stuff yesterday. It gets back an answer. It was 60 degrees yesterday. It's got the temperature. Now it can use the calculator, and then it inputs this. I'm pretty sure this is a Python string, and it gets the answer out. So then it says that the answer is 1.099. I actually didn't do the math. I'm just assuming that was correct. But the idea is that it was able, you gave it a 2-step kind of requirement, not just a question, like two steps you wanted to do, and it figured out what, based on the tools it had, how it could achieve that goal. So that's super exciting. This particular use case isn't super interesting, like I said, but this is the beginnings of something. Questions about this? Okay. A slightly better, slightly more, at least more interesting example. Can LangChain agents run in parallel? I don't know, and I would imagine not. We'll talk a little bit about why I think that, but in this case, it needed to know what the temperature was yesterday before it did the math, so it could not. If you had something like you gave it 4 cities that you wanted to do the calculation for, you could probably imagine it doing all those, but I don't know how good the reasoning, the planning is, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But if you know more, or if you have heard something else, that'd be great. I would love to hear that. Okay, so this is a slightly better example. Well, slightly more interesting example. The conversational buffer memory, that's not important. That was just a side effect of something. The thing is that the tools we're going to use are stable diffusion tool. So that's an image generation, image captioning tool, stable diffusion prompt generator tool. So a tool that helps you create a better prompt for stable diffusion, and a text to video tool. And this is a tool that takes text and creates a video out of that text. So you create the agent using the tools, the LLM you have created up there, the kind of memory you want it to use, the type of agent you want it to be. And again, verbose is true. And you give it this 3-step prompt, a more involved prompt. Please create a photo of this is probably where you would template it, a dog riding a skateboard is all you're going to give it. But improve the prompt prior to using an image generator, then capture the generated image and create a video from it using the improved prompt. This is starting to feel like maybe a content creation company agency might want something like this. I don't know, where they need to generate a bunch of images and a bunch of videos of something. So, is this going to be useful for, it's a little bit more reasonable than raising a temperature to some random number. If you run this, it says, do I need to use a tool? Yes, I've got this prompt. I need to make a better prompt. So it goes from a dog riding a skateboard. It just generates a dog riding a skateboard, digital painting, ArtStation concept art, smooth, sharp focus, illustration, art by Artgerm and Greg Rutowski, alpha, Muksha, whatever. Right. So that's the kind of prompt you need to give the image generation systems, so that you get to have it narrow down on the kind of image you want generated. How it decided these things, I don't know. And like how you go about controlling it, I don't know. How people are going to use something like this, I don't know. But again, like I said, it's the beginning of something. So it did that. Then so that was the going from a dog riding a skateboard to a better prompt, a quote unquote better prompt, and then using stable diffusion with that prompt to generate an image. It starts to generate the image. It starts to do the image captioning. It starts, and it does the text to video with that image and that caption to generate this image. The image it generated was a dog riding a skateboard. It actually generated a couple different images. This is the one I like the best. Of course, there's whatever. It's a dog riding a skateboard. The video it generated was a sad trombone because it was not a properly formatted video. I don't even know what it could have. I ran it a bunch of times. But it took so long to run, I just got tired of trying to run it, trying to get it to work. So in this particular case, it would not generate the image correctly for me. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing, or maybe it's just a very I'm not sure. We could look that up. So there's a question: what's using for text to video on the back end? I'm not sure. We can look that up in a minute. Maybe I did something wrong, maybe whatever. It just wasn't quite there. This is the beginning of something, but I don't think it's fully baked yet. And I will say that agents, AutoGPT, Baby AGI, I have not played with them extensively, so I'm not like an expert in them, so I can't tell you for sure. What I've seen is that there's a lot of examples on the web. A lot of them I think are cherry picked. I don't know how reliable or how reliably you can get an answer and how often that answer is actually of any use. And so if it's not reliable, I don't think everything needs to be completely reliable to be useful, but it needs to achieve some level of reliability for it to be useful. I don't know if we're anywhere near there yet. What the agents give you is kind of a trade-off between something being very dynamic and having a lot of control, because we could have done that example with the generating the image and then generating the video and gotten it to work if we had done a lot more Python. But the idea here is that someone's going to be able to specify it in English, and then kind of dynamically, we're going to figure this all out. So that's really interesting. I mean, I think there is a lot of value in dynamic stuff. I think right now you might be better off trying to do it all in Python, and doing step by step, because you have control over errors and you can test to see that the video is actually correct and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to see how this develops. Also, this then is starting to hint at the future of English as a programming language, which I think maybe I don't think that people fully understand what that means. They'll say, oh, we'll be able just to say something and then it'll write a web app for us. What they don't realize is they're gonna have to say something more than just something. They're gonna have to say a lot, because gathering requirements for any project is kind of like a big part of the project. And then gathering the requirements and formatting them in a particular way so that you're understood well, that's a big part of the project. And that's a lot like programming. So I'm a little bit on the side, on a soapbox here, but I just want to point out that is a challenge. I think that people, I don't think it's fully appreciated at how difficult it is to be able to, it's going to be to specify something in English well enough that you're actually satisfied with the result. And if people disagree, I'd love to hear what their thoughts on that. Is there a way to input a few images and add some prompts and have GPT create a picture or piece of art? Not with LangChain out of the box, but you can use Midjourney's one tool. It means English professors are pumping their fists. Oh yeah. So I think that last comment was directed at my soapbox comments. Kenneth, I'm not sure. With Kenneth and Natasha, depends on these. That's correct. There's nothing out of the box, but I wonder what you can do with these agents, especially as they start to work a little bit better. Because I bet you there are ways you can get the agents to do different things for you that we right now can't imagine LangChain doing directly, but we'd have to think about that. I think I'm just saying that for myself mostly because I want to train my mind to think, when I think, oh no, we have to use Python for that, or we've got to program that directly, think, okay, well, what is possible? What are all the different tools we could use? And is there some crazy way we can combine these tools to get some particular result that we want, that I hadn't imagined before, because it's a new kind of programming, it's new English, it's new everything. So, trying to think that way. I'm trying to think that way more.
Have you seen libraries like LangChain implement new features as the capabilities of LLMs have improved? Specifically, kind of following up to that question, now that GPT-4 is multimodal, you can give it image inputs. So are we seeing that flowing through the entire ecosystem?
Right. Thank you. And that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, these things maybe there is a way to do it. These libraries change every single day, like every hour something changes. So I haven't seen that example yet, but I would not be surprised if next week that example exists somewhere, So they really are changing super fast. So if there's a feature out there, if there's an API, somebody is building a bridge to it, and then with these bridges, we kind of have English now as our glue. So English is our glue language when we don't want to write Python. Yeah. Okay. Some considerations. Privacy, as we talked about earlier, the data is sent to the vendor. And your other option is to run a probably smaller in-house model. Smaller means it's not going to be as capable in general, but it might be capable enough for your particular use case. And you might be able to train it so that it is actually more capable for your use case than the larger general model. But that's going to take time and work and energy, and you got to figure out how to train it and so on. But it's certainly possible. Usage policies. Right now we're playing fast and loose with rights and everything, and who knows what, Stable Diffusion is getting sued. I think Reddit, and I forget who else wants to sue OpenAI for using that data in the training. So it's hard to tell what data is legal, what data you're going to get sued for, or whatever. So you got to be careful with all that stuff. Pricing. The APIs are not free. GPT-3 is faster and cheaper quite a bit than GPT-4. GPT-4, I don't know. One prompt might cost a fraction of a cent. It kind of depends on how big the prompt is. Like, it's hard to kind of predict how much it's going to be. But then once you start using things like agents, it can make a bunch of calls. It can make recursive calls. It can make an infinite number of calls. And so an infinite number of fractions of a cent is an infinite amount of money. So you got to just keep an eye on your bill. And it may be totally worth it for your business or your use case, but it may not be something that you really want to do. Fine-tuning and hosting can be a challenge. And whenever you use this, if it's going to require careful analysis of the evaluating the model. Are these answers good enough? And what can we do to make these answers better? They're never going to be perfect because a lot of these are very subjective kind of results, but are they good enough for what you want to do? And can you surface the right user experience and expectations so that your users know what to expect and know how to use the answers you give them? If they believe that it's absolutely 100% correct, then it's not going to be as successful as if they maybe treat it as a starting point or a first draft of something that they can then use to build upon. I think that's a great way to use something. Treat everything as a first draft. So those are some challenges. So my conclusion here is that the OpenAI API is really straightforward. It's easy to use. LangChain has a lot of cool functionality on top of it. Integrating is powerful. It's easy. It's fun. Look for cases where you can use AI in the loop as a first draft for whatever it is you're doing, so that you don't say that the house has built-in shelves when it doesn't, bookshelves when it doesn't. But it'll definitely save you time and energy when you go to write those descriptions, when you go to do summarizations and so on. Okay, that's it. I have more slides and more technical information if people want to hear it, although I have been speaking for almost an hour, so I don't know if we really want to go into that, but I will entertain any questions about that. And I'm looking at the questions. With Auto, GPT, Baby GI, and others, prompt engineering. It says dead in place of goal engineering. I'm not sure that was the right word. Maybe that's a typo.
So in Auto GPT and Baby AGI, you don't create prompts. You create goals. So it's up to like 5 goals, and then GPT-4 they create the prompts. So that's how I was asking. Since Auto GPT is kind of like taking the internet by storm.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. I don't have an opinion on that. What I'm gonna say is that I think planning in general is like hard. It's probably NP complete for a lot of things. So I'll be curious to see how well these Auto GPT type things actually plan more sophisticated, more complicated things, if they really can, or how complicated they can get, and then how useful they can get when they get that complicated. And then, well, if we're saying that prompt engineering is going to go away because now we have goal engineering, well, okay, so now we have to do goal engineering, and probably specifies our goals in a way that they can be satisfied, whatever that really is. I don't know. So that's all brand new. So I think we're going to see what that takes us. The other comment is GPT-4 is literally 1,000 times more expensive than GPT-3. Yeah, it's still less than a cent for an individual for like a small call, but those add up. It's also a lot slower. I can show you in the code that I can get something back from GPT-3 in like a second or two, and then GPT-4 can take 30 seconds. It can take 60 seconds, which is a lot for an interactive kind of app. So it's not quite there yet. Or I mean, it's kind of difficult.
Is the slowdown just due to there being a lot more load on that server, or is the model itself that much deeper to get a response back?
It's hard to say. I'm sure a lot of it is because of the load, but I think a lot of it is that the model is just that much slower and bigger and slower. But I've never gotten a very fast answer out of it. How about that? So no matter what the load is, it never gets fast. Okay. That's it. Any other questions or comments or?
Michael, have you tried Auto GPT yet?
I haven't, although I did watch that pizza ordering bot video.
Yeah.
That was compelling, but definitely very compelling in the kind of way of they did 100 different takes and finally got something to work.
Exactly.
Right. Here's what I will say about like Auto GPT. So you have to kind of walk it through what you want it to do. It's not as simple as you set up the 5 goals and then it does exactly what you want. If you're not watching it, so this is the mistake I did on day 1. They have continuous mode. Like, well, let me just go and put it on GPT-4 and put it on continuous mode. And when I wake up, wherever I'm at, that's where I'm at. When I woke up, I got nowhere, and it capped me out at $120 in terms of API costs. So after every command, you kind of have to like give it feedback on what you need to do. Sometimes it's hard-headed and it'll do what it wants to do. And you have to spank it a little bit. But yeah, it still has a long way to go. So in terms of creating like an entire game or a website, like with project files and everything, not yet. Not yet.
There have been some good examples, but you're not going to build Facebook, through English prompts just yet.
No. Well, you can if you put it if you're willing to put, I don't know, 500, 1,000 prompts into it, maybe with GPT-4, maybe. I feel the way I feel like with GPT-4 is if you can really spec out what you're trying to do, and that is a hurdle in and of itself, then you can do it in terms of like coding and stuff like that. It can be done. Are you willing to sit there for 20, 30 hours, 1,000, 2,000 prompts to do it? That depends on the individual.
Hi, Leo. This is Naisha Mortimer.
Hey,
Nice
Naisha.
meeting you. And thank you for sharing all this knowledge. I'm a bit of a newbie to Python as well as GPT. So thank you for all of this. And it's actually quite a bit. It's just kind of mind-boggling. Do you have any like advice or like maybe like some ideas for small like beginner projects to kind of get me into GPT, and like that combines GPT and maybe like a little bit of Python to kind of just get my foot in the water instead of drowning?
Sure. Well, thank you. I think that LangChain has some tutorials that are really useful, but it's also a new project, and I think the documentation is a little bit scattered. I wish they had a better, like exactly like getting started, like this is the first step. But they have tutorials where they like, okay, this is this is your first step, but then this is a vector database, and then this is a document, and this is and they throw up a bunch of things at you. Still, I think if you're really interested in the GPT stuff, that might be a good way to start. In particular, pick out some of the simpler examples, like just like in the first examples I gave you, like just create a prompt, submit the prompt, and then look at the answer. And then depending on how new you are or what you want to do, you can play with automatically customizing that prompt, so do some string manipulations based on whatever you want. I mean, you could read a text file, you could read a database, you could read a spreadsheet, you could read a bunch of different things and do those type of things. That might be a way to start.
What I did, I asked ChatGPT, give me example how to use ChatGPT API in Python code, and it did. It gave me example, and then there was a bunch of parameters. I asked what those parameters are, and it explained me what those parameters. So you can try to ask it.
That's a good idea. I've never even thought about that. Thank you. Thank you both.
You can check our meeting recording from last month. The focus was a general intro, but also just how to leverage GPT as a Python developer. So we looked at some of the APIs and had 2 code examples, but a lot of it was about learning or having it write code for you. And so you could use it exactly like you said. Hey, I want to learn about how to use GPT, or I want you to write a basic function to do X, Y, and Z, and it will do it for you. So check out that video for a couple of the techniques that we use to use GPT as a developer.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. I'll definitely take a look at that.